The supply ship broke atmosphere with a wheeze, listed hard to port, and slammed into the surface of Rix 97 with the enthusiasm of a cinder block dropped from orbit. Commander Zelen of the Trivex Engineering Corps emerged from the crumpled bridge hatch. His scales tinged a dull green of despair. "This planet is worthless," he declared, surveying the shattered remains of their vessel. Behind him, 12 other alien engineers stared across a landscape strewn with twisted metal, slag heaps, and dead drones. Rix 97 had been a mining world a century earlier, long stripped of value and left as a dumping ground for obsolete tech. Every sensor ping confirmed what their eyes already told them. No functioning fuel sources, no usable power cores, no fabrication nodes. Just rust, ash, and the ghosts of machines. "We must prepare to die slowly," one said with grim finality. Then came the voice that would change everything. "Well," said Travis Cole, wiping grease off his palms, "I've seen worse." Zelen turned. Travis stood beside a heap of torn panels and fractured hull plating, chewing something that smelled burnt. A rusted fusion wrench hung from his belt. His clothes were patched, stained, and entirely inappropriate for a crash site. "You are the human," Zelen stated flatly. "Yep. Civilian mechanic, space certified in 4 systems. Contracted for bolt checks on Trivex vessels. You were not listed on the crew manifest." "Yeah, I hitched a ride." Zelen's eye ridges twitched. "You are a stowaway." "Guess I am now." Travis tossed the charred snack aside and crouched beside a bent coolant pipe. "You got any idea what works around here?" The aliens began dismantling the wreck, running diagnostics, drawing diagrams in the dust. Within hours, they had determined conclusively that nothing could be salvaged. Travis, meanwhile, dragged a hissing, half-melted panel across the ground, kicked it into place beside an intact power converter, and started welding. "You are wasting time," Zelen told him. "That's usually when I do my best work." By day 3, the alien engineers had built a perfectly logical argument for inaction. They erected shelters from emergency kits, allocated ration packs, and planned how to stretch their power cells across the next 4 months until someone came looking. Travis built a windmill. "Why is it rotating?" one asked, baffled. "Because wind exists," Travis replied, "and so does this busted magnetic alternator. Stick a few bearings in the right spots and you've got a charge loop." Zelen examined the setup with disdain. "You constructed a generator from mining blades, scaffold poles, and duct tape." "Well," Travis shrugged, "the blades spin, the poles hold them up, and duct tape is eternal." When he lit the first salvage bulb, the alien camp fell silent. On day 7, he made a water purifier. On day 10, he hacked an obsolete drone for terrain mapping. By day 15, he had his own corner of the junkyard roped off as a workshop. "None of this should work," Zelen muttered, watching Travis rewire a control panel using flattened spoon handles and melted insulation as solder. "But it does," one of the junior engineers whispered. That night, the windmill spun under Rix 97's twin moons, casting moving shadows across walls stitched from thermal blankets and reinforced paneling. The humans called it Travistown. The aliens refused to name it at all. The breakthrough came at the end of week 3. Zelen stood over a cracked stasis pod while Travis examined its wiring. "It is fried," Zelen said. "The core degraded. No stasis capability remains." "Cool," Travis said, cracking his knuckles. "I'm not using it for stasis." "What led?" "A ship." Zelen stared. "You intend to fly a decommissioned cryopod, powered by a windmill battery, guided by a mapping drone, with engine parts pulled from 3 different propulsion classes. You think that is not how flight works." Travis glanced up, grinning. "You want to sit here for 6 months, eating protein sludge and playing depression bingo? Be my guest. I'm building a way out." He repurposed the pod's containment chamber into a pressurized cockpit, tore out the cryo lines, and rerouted the junctions to a jury-rig thruster bank he built from shuttle stabilizers. A salvaged thermal vent became a guidance rudder. Cooling rods from the wreck's waste recycler were modified into shock-dampening supports. The aliens watched it rise from the scrap like a mechanical phoenix, held together with zip ties and stubbornness. "We calculated over 2,000 failure points," Zelen told him. "Cool," Travis said. "I only need it to fly once." By week 5, other engineers began drifting over to help. One offered to reprogram the mapping drone into a basic nav computer. Another tested the pressure seal integrity using modified diagnostic foam. They didn't admit it, but they were all watching for the same thing. Truth. Not of Travis's skill or even his improbable engineering, but of possibility. No one had told the humans this couldn't be done, so he didn't stop, and that terrified them. Travis's ship, affectionately dubbed the Scraphopper by the younger engineers, began to take on a life of its own. By week 6, it had wings. Not real wings, but 2 broad stabilizing fins welded from the skeletons of broken mining drones. They extended from the pod's sides at a slight upward angle, bolted on with a mix of tension bands, industrial rivets, and glue made from melted insulation foam. Zelen walked a tight circle around it every morning, shaking his head. "This is no longer an act of survival," he muttered. "It is theater." "Yup," Travis replied, mouthful of roasted algae bar. "But good theater gets standing ovations." More and more of the alien engineers stopped monitoring the build and started contributing to it. Krell, a propulsion specialist, quietly designed an alternate venting sequence for the thruster tubes using spare hydraulic regulators from a collapsed cargo loader. Linva, a structural analyst who hadn't spoken aloud in 2 weeks, devised a lattice support system using broken sled runners from the wrecked landing craft. Even Zelen began lending a reluctant hand, adjusting the angle of the retro boosters while muttering that it was only to prevent total disintegration on ignition. They built a ship, a real one, from garbage. It had no nameplate, no central AI, and half of its parts still had scorch marks. But it had shape, power, and thrust potential. Every day, Travis modified a little more. He used emergency tape to seal microfractures. He tied down hull panels with braided wires. When one thruster casing cracked, he reinforced it with an entire broken chair frame. And one afternoon, the guidance system, Franz, the mapping drone, spoke. Course approximation, viable. The camp fell silent. No one dared to breathe. Zelen stepped forward. "Franz, clarify. Do you predict flight?" Probability of non-catastrophic launch exceeds 71%. The cheer that erupted shook bolts loose from the ship's underside. Travis fixed them on the spot. That night, they ate by lantern light in the hangar bay they'd carved from the belly of the wrecked freighter. The walls were lined with charts scribbled in grease and soot, wiring diagrams sketched on insulation panels. Someone had drawn a crooked image of the Scraphopper in flight, with flames painted in red mineral chalk shooting from its tail. Zelen stared at it, arms crossed. "You know this is madness," he said quietly. "I've known that since I duct-taped a gravity stabilizer to a bread toaster," Travis replied. "But here we are." Zelen's expression softened. "Why?" Travis leaned back. "Because giving up feels worse than failing?" Zelen said nothing. But the next day, he woke early and bolted reinforcement ribs to the landing struts. Launch day arrived 3 days later. The camp turned out in full force. Tents were packed, rations consolidated, communications were routed through the makeshift antenna tower Travis built out of rusted scaffolding and spare plates. The Scraphopper stood on its own power, engines humming softly, its hull gleaming in uneven patches under the pale sky. Inside, Travis strapped into the pilot seat, a scavenged acceleration couch from the forward command module. Franz hovered above the console, feeding data to the cobbled-together nav system. The flight stick was made from a conduit tube, foam wrapped around the top, secured with heavy bands, and, of course, duct tape. Zelen approached the side hatch. "You have no training in flight command." "Sure don't." "The odds remain against you. Still above 0. Zelen stared at him for a long moment, then held out a tool. Manual override for the stabilization matrix. Adjust it mid-flight if you enter a spin. Travis took it, smiled, and tucked it beside his seat. Appreciate that. The engineers backed away. Travis powered the engines. The Scraphopper shook like an angry fridge full of magnets, thrusters lighting up one by one. The guidance system chirped uncertainly. The rear stabilizer flexed. Alarms blinked and cleared. Systems clattered into place. Then, with a roar that startled birds into flight, the ship lifted. Slowly, uncertainly, it rose above the makeshift camp. Scrap shifted on the hull. Panels trembled, but it held. The crew below stared upward, mouths open, as the impossible began to happen. The Scraphopper climbed 5 meters, 10, 30. Then, as if the sky itself gave permission, it tilted forward and accelerated into the clouds, trailing sparks and glory. Inside the cockpit, Travis whooped. "I love it when you don't explode." Franz buzzed uncertainly. "Hull temperature rising, but flight trajectory optimal." The signal streamed live to the surface. Cheers shook the valley. For the first time in weeks, the aliens forgot the crash. They forgot the hopelessness, the loss of their ship, their helpless wait for rescue. They watched something fly again, something they'd built from despair and leftovers. Travis orbited the valley once before landing, with a bounce, then another, then a graceful skid into the soft dirt. He emerged, covered in soot, grinning like a madman. Zelen marched forward. "You bent the port rudder." "Sure did." "And the landing gear is fused." "Guess it is." Zelen took a breath, then slowly held out a hand. Travis shook it. "I was wrong about you," Zelen admitted. Travis looked up at the ship, steaming gently in the morning light. "Wrong about a lot of things, I think." The aliens gathered around the hull, placing hands on the still warm metal. There was no ceremony, no anthem, just awe. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't pretty. But it flew, and they had built it together. The second flight drew a crowd. Within days of the Scraphopper's maiden orbit, word had spread to nearby colonies and relay stations. Although rescue was still weeks away, the ship's flight logs and diagnostics had been transmitted to passing satellites, then bounced to Alliance comm channels. Engineers, pilots, and station techs across multiple systems began tuning into the live updates from Rix 97. The aliens didn't say it out loud, but they were waiting to see if the first flight was a fluke. It wasn't. Travis tweaked the thruster assembly, tightened the frame with salvaged heat bracing brackets, and rigged a more stable power converter using a backup life support system. He ran test after test, gradually bringing in the other engineers for calibration work. "You made this look easy," Krell admitted one night as they examined a hull seam. "Nah," Travis said. "It's never easy, just loud and fast." The camp shifted. Where once there had been only survival calculations and ration tallies, there were now teams welding side panels, refining oxygen scrubbers, and cataloging useful debris. Several engineers set up a second windmill to charge a new battery bank. Others began mapping every square meter of the junk fields, color-coding the debris piles. Hope, once an abstract, had become measurable in kilowatts and recycled metal. Zelen watched this with an uneasy admiration. He was a systems expert, trained in theory, efficiency, and the logic of precision. Watching Travis work was like seeing someone fix a clock using a hammer, a magnet, and a fistful of wire, and somehow having it keep time better than before. "You violate every principle of standard design," Zelen said one evening as Travis used a stripped cooling tube to brace the pilot canopy. Travis didn't look up. "And yet, here we are. I do not understand how you know which parts will work." "I don't always," Travis replied, tightening a bolt with a length of pipe. "But I try, I listen, and I never waste a good mistake." Zelen shook his head slowly. "You are more dangerous than your reputation suggests." The third ship was Zelen's idea. At first, he didn't call it that. He asked Travis to help him assemble a stabilized cargo frame, for testing component alignment. Then he wanted to benchmark hull compression standards. Eventually, Travis asked point blank, "You building a ship, Zelen?" "Possibly." "You want help?" Zelen hesitated, then nodded once. Together, they stripped one of the wreck's support pods, rebuilt the core housing, and installed dual fuel regulators. It was clunky, heavy, and shaped like a flattened beetle, but it moved. By week 8, there were 3 ships under construction and 2 in testing. The aliens stopped calling them Travis's projects and started calling them ours. One night, after a long test flight, Travis stood on a ridge overlooking the junkyard, the horizon glowing softly under Rix 97's twin moons. Anna Vell, one of the structural engineers, joined him with 2 mugs of something warm and slightly bitter. "You know," she said, handing him one, "this was supposed to be a death watch." "Yeah," Travis said, sipping. It was. Now it's an airfield. Below them, the lit silhouettes of 3 hulls glinted in the night. Engineers milled around work tables. Someone played music through a hacked speaker. Sparks flickered from a plasma torch. Travis smiled. "Can't waste a good junk pile." He turned back to the ridge and spotted something strange near the southern boundary of the field. A tall figure, moving awkwardly through the scrap. Travis squinted. "You seeing that?" Anna narrowed her eyes. "Movement in Zone C?" "Come on." They slid down the hill, boots crunching softly on metal shards. As they approached, the figure turned. It was a member of the Voron, one of the oldest species in the Alliance, rarely seen off-planet. The Voron engineer was wrapped in a protective cloak, its 6 arms clasped tightly around a spherical object. "Can I help you?" Travis asked. The Vorun inclined its upper body in a traditional greeting. "I received fragments of your transmissions. I came to see if the rumors were true." "But what rumors?" "That humans can create starships from nothing but stubbornness." Travis chuckled. "We also use tape." The Vorun held out the object. "This is a harmonizer node from a long-defunct vessel, useless to most. May I watch what you do with it?" Travis took the node and turned it over in his hands. "Sure. You can help too." The next day, a delegation of mechanics from a nearby orbital mining facility arrived. 2 days after that, a crew of trade technicians from an abandoned refueling outpost touched down in a battered shuttle. They brought tools, knowledge, and debris. By week 9, Rix 97 was no longer just a camp. It was a colony of engineers. One afternoon, Travis sat in the shadow of the Scraphopper, chewing the last protein bar and sketching an idea for a detachable shuttle pod on the back of an old invoice. Zelen sat beside him, reviewing structural fatigue logs. "You know," Zelen said, "you could have just waited to be rescued." "Yeah," Travis said. "But then, I wouldn't get to do this." He gestured to the junk field. Below them, engineers from 6 species welded, riveted, and repurposed the remains of the past into the promise of something new. Travis looked up at the sky. "We got more flying to do." 3 months after the crash, the junkyard on Rix 97 was no longer a graveyard. From orbit, it resembled a patchwork city. Metal spires rising out of rust, wings and stabilizers glinting under the twin suns. Rows of crude hangars fashioned from collapsed cargo bays and towering skeletal beams. It had power, direction, and, most importantly, flight. They called it Yard Point. A fleet of 7 ships now sat across the valley, each one different, each one impossible, built not from matched components or streamlined alloys, but from the wrong parts, used the right way. They had designations and functions, though no 2 were alike. The original Scraphopper had been retrofitted as a scout. Travis now flew test orbits daily, logging trajectories, scanning asteroid fields for salvage, and occasionally doing low passes over the camp, just to watch the engineers scatter and curse. He liked that part. But something had shifted. This wasn't just a project anymore. This was a home. Zelen had stopped calculating the percentage of usable parts and started arguing over aesthetics. Anna designed modular cabin blocks using refitted freight containers. Krell installed a docking gantry and 3 solar arrays using antique elevator shafts. Even the Vorin, reclusive and solemn, began carving symbols into the hulls. Blessings, they explained, for long journeys built on broken dreams. And then the message came. A signal from Alliance Command, clean and strong. A long-range patrol had picked up their beacon and was inbound. Rescue, supplies, a way back. It would arrive in 6 days. Travis stared at the message on his display for a long time. 6 days. He wasn't sure if he felt relief or disappointment. The camp was quiet that night. Most of the engineers didn't sleep. Some walked the scrapyards. Some sat beside the ships, hands resting on patched hulls, heads tilted toward the stars. They had built their survival out of junk and willpower, and now, on the brink of rescue, it felt like they might lose something instead of gain it. Zelen found Travis in the workshop calibrating an alignment tool made from a thermal coil and 3 ball bearings. "You're gonna stay, aren't you?" Zelen asked. Travis shrugged. "Maybe." Zelen stepped inside, folding his arms. "They'll offer you everything. Command, commendations, a seat on the board." Travis laughed. "They'll probably try to fine me for stowing away. You've done something remarkable here." "No, we all did." Zelen didn't argue. The next morning, Travis stood before the camp. Behind him, the fleet shimmered in the sunrise. Weld marks, heat scoring, mismatched plates. They looked like something from a dream. "We started this with nothing," Travis said. "Scrap and scraps of hope. But you all showed up, not just to survive, but to create. You built ships out of ruins. We made a place where ingenuity mattered more than precision, where effort beat design, where people who gave up once came back to try again." He looked out at the faces, human and alien, tired and proud. "The Alliance will send help soon. But don't let them take this from you. Don't forget what it felt like to build something that shouldn't have worked, and fly it anyway." The fleet launched, one by one, that afternoon. Not to leave, but to prove a point. Each ship took to the air under its own power, circled the valley, and returned. No accidents, no catastrophes, just raw, improvised success. The Alliance patrol arrived on schedule, sleek and perfect, orbiting above in a display of technological superiority. The commander stepped onto the surface, crisp and efficient. Yard point and nearly dropped his tablet. "These ships are not in any registry." "Nope," Travis said. "They were assembled without regulation schematics." "Correct. This violates no fewer than 47 engineering laws." Travis smiled. "Guess we'll need some new laws." In the weeks that followed, the camp was documented, studied, and slowly absorbed into the broader network. But something curious happened. No one wanted to disassemble the ships. No one wanted to shut down the windmills, or scrub the grease off the floor plates. They let it stand. Geared Point became official, an experimental dock, a haven for creative engineering, a school for practical problem solving. Crews came from across the galaxy to learn not just how to fix things, but how to look at broken pieces and see the shape of something new. Travis stayed. Not because he had to, but because there was always one more ship to help finish, one more junior tech to encourage, one more busted regulator to convert into something useful. On the 1-year anniversary of the crash, they held a celebration in Hangar B. Drones buzzed with lights. Music from 5 worlds played across cracked speakers, and Daisy, the camp dog, brought in by a cargo crew 2 months earlier, managed to chew through 2 bootlaces and a coolant line before anyone noticed. Zelen raised a glass of something mildly radioactive and nodded to Travis. "You were right," he said. "About what? You don't need perfect parts to build something worth flying." They toasted. Outside, the Scraphopper sat under its shelter, hull patched again, paint faded but ready. A ship made from a junkyard. A symbol of every time someone said it couldn't be done. And did it anyway.